Vynsent.
Is it just me, or does it seem like everybody wants to go back in time these days? With the resurgence of the Y2K aesthetic, an endless wave of nostalgic doom scrolling, and even bad video quality becoming a trend with content creators, it looks like people are really beginning to realize how much we took for granted in the early 2000s. From the loss of Blockbuster and other beloved rental stores, a lack of passion in the present-day gaming industry, and honestly a ridiculous amount of negative information being pushed into our heads every day, it seems that many of us are mentally vacating to the once prosperous and colorful times of the new millennium. And as someone who has quite literally built this entire channel on the history of those incredibly precious years, there's often times that I will seek to indulge myself in some of the early 2000s finest gaming landscapes. But as of recent, I found myself wandering through a bit of a rabbit hole into a certain game studio's wide catalog of early 2000s releases. I mean, the environments, the soundtracks, and just the overall vibe of these games really encapsulate that Y2K feeling in such a beautiful way. And although a fair bit of these titles had nothing short of clunky control schemes and less than innovative game mechanics, I found myself fully enthralled in the atmosphere. So without further ado, and without me being vaguely discreet, allow me to take you all on a journey through the charming aesthetic of Namco games, as we seek to find what it was that made these games so captivating then, and even more so now. But before we get started, allow me to indulge you all in a brief history of Namco, and how they came to be one of the most stylish development studios the world has ever seen. Xevious was a knockout hit, with over 1.5 million units being moved on the Famicom. With all this momentum steadily building for Namco, it was obvious they had an incredibly bright future in the business of gaming and had now become a titan of industry. And while we've revisited some of Namco's humble beginnings, I'd like to skip ahead about 10 odd years or so, to a relationship that birthed some of the very charming gaming aesthetics that we're here to discuss. A beautiful partnership that came in the form of Namco and Sony. In early 1994, Sony was in the process of developing the very first model of the PlayStation console. This console first began as a collab with Nintendo, in which Sony aimed to achieve a CD-based peripheral rather than using cartridges. But this didn't go over too well with Nintendo, who eventually pulled out of the deal, leading to Sony having to go rogue on the project and do everything under their own name. The problem was Sony had zero experience in producing games, and if they had any hope for creating the next big thing for in-home gaming, they were going to need some serious help. They reached out to Namco, who at the time were also a bit frustrated with Nintendo. And after a bit of smack talk, they got to work on converting a console version of their most popular arcade game at the time. A game that contributed to the early success of the PlayStation, and a series that is still very much beloved in present day. When it comes to charming aesthetics, grooving soundtracks, and intense fun, some of Namco's finest work came in the form of the Ridge Racer series. So put on your racing gloves and get ready to burn some rubber as we dive into the stylish atmosphere of Ridge Racer 1 on the original PlayStation. While we are primarily going to focus on Namco's 6th generation offerings, I felt it would be important for us to take a trip back to the roots of this incredible series. The original Ridge Racer was first released as an arcade game in Japan on October 30th of 1993. Making use of the Namco System 22 hardware, Ridge Racer boasted some incredible visuals for its time and gave its players a healthy mix of arcade-style driving mechanics with the first-person feel that is found in most racing simulators. Just a little over a couple years later, the West had finally got its taste for fast-paced driving, with the home console released in America on September of 1995. Ridge Racer was released as an original PlayStation launch title and gave Sony a major advantage over its competitors at the time. The game played a serious role in establishing the PlayStation as the next big thing in gaming, and with graphics and gameplay like these in the early to mid 90s, you'd be hard pressed to find a young kid who didn't want to play this game. While the game only featured one course to race on, they gave it some replayability by adding a difficulty system that would add onto the track, giving a new experience as you hone your driving skills. And while the game handles a little strange compared to most racing games we have in present day, Ridge Racer delivers a solid experience overall. But we're not here to review or criticize these games. I'm only giving some background info for a series that became one of the most stylish offerings in Namco's catalog. And when it comes to the introduction of some serious style for this series, look no further than R4, otherwise known as Ridge Racer Type 4. After the previous release of Ridge Racer 1 and 2 to a mediocre third entry named Rage Racer, Namco felt its momentum for the series was coming to an end. While the first two games fared well among critics, their third entry was seen as nothing much more than a repetitive rehash. And with the competition of other racing series steadily mounting on Namco, they knew they were going to have to make some unique changes. While the Gran Turismo series came to be the pinnacle of what most will call a racing simulator, Ridge Racer's roots were found in the arcade, which gave them a bit of an edge in terms of delivering a new experience to racing fans with their fourth entry. They needed to make a game that was not only fun to play, but also great to look at. So with taking that into consideration and adding a killer soundtrack to boot, let's take a look at the stylish offerings of Ridge Racer Type 4 and see why it is that so many fans have found it to be so captivating. From the very moment the intro cutscene begins, our ears are met with the smooth sounds of Urban Fragments by Kota Takahashi featuring Kamara Lovelace. The song really sets the tone for the laid-back dreamscape that is presented in this stylish opening, and pairs incredibly well with the game's overall aesthetic. The juxtaposition of this charming young woman who is seemingly on her way to work, to the fleet of hot rods racing in the streets, provides a strange yet enthralling spectacle for its viewers, preparing us for what's to come in R4's stylish gameplay.
to the Real Racing Roots 99 Grand Prix.
Moving on to the story mode, otherwise known as Grand Prix, you're met with a charming little intro, explaining the rules of the tournament. The entire series is split into 8 separate races, 4 of which must be won in first place. You'll move on to pick which team you would like to represent in the series, all with their own unique storylines and dialogue. I personally love the way they handled the conversations between yourself and the team, as it was simple yet effective. Next, you'll pick your car, and then it's off to the races. Time to prove yourself, kid. The series will have you speeding through 8 different locations, all of which have their own unique soundtrack assigned to that course. And while most racing simulators aim to give its player an adrenaline-soaked experience, just take a moment to appreciate how calming the gameplay can be in R4. What a vibe. Now, one of my favorite highlights of this game is the replay of your performance after you finish a race. The game will typically record your best lap and then play it back to you with cinematic camera angles. There were multiple moments while playing that I would execute a perfect drift and just couldn't wait to see how cool the replay would be after the race. And while a lot of racing simulators have since added this mechanic in their games, I can only imagine how cool it was to see this done back in '99. As you collect each victory, the morale between you and your team will become increasingly better, along with your choice of vehicles. And while each Grand Prix mode will only take around an hour or so to finish, the game's addicting atmosphere, charming characters, and stylish UI is sure to keep you coming back for multiple playthroughs, along with the option of 9 different trophy variants for meeting the requirements of different completions. R4 also boasts a multiplayer, time attack mode, and jukebox option, giving its players plenty of replayability and even more reason to keep this game in rotation. It's a title that is widely loved for good reason, but it's only the introduction to a wide range of charming aesthetics that Namco has in store for us. So let's take the keys out of the ignition and get ready to hit the slopes as we move on to our next stop in Alpine Racer 3 on the PlayStation 2. Many extreme sports titles of the early 2000s reigned supreme for their fast-paced mechanics and often stylish aesthetic. But in the realms of snowboarding and skiing games, the main series that will come to mind for most is that of the SSX series. While SSX is arguably the best to ever do it on the home console, there was one certain arcade series that was trying its best to make its presence known, and thus our introduction into the world of Alpine Racer. Alpine Racer was a Namco-developed arcade racer that made use of a swaying handlebar-like controller to simulate the act of skiing and snowboarding. The very first game in the series made its arcade debut in December of 1994, and was a massive success, becoming one of the top 5 highest-grossing arcade games of '96. That very same year of 1996 saw the release of its sequel, with Alpine Racer 2, hitting the arcades with a new multiplayer mode and an even more impressive course selection. The game fared well among critics, and was even used in a Harvard study for amnesia sufferers, to study the relationship between learning and sleep. But the new millennium was afoot. With home console gaming becoming more popular than ever before, it was time for Namco to take their successful skiing series to the next level, with Alpine Racer 3 on the PlayStation 2. Now, this is a game that I'm sure many of my US viewers will be unfamiliar with, as the game only released in both Japanese and PAL regions, meaning there was never a proper North American launch. But upon my research of Namco and their wide selection of games, I had just happened to have stumbled upon the cover art of Alpine Racer 3. Safe to say, I was interested. From what I could see, I was getting a Japanese-style SSX tricky type of vibe from the artwork. And with no previous knowledge of the series, I found myself an emulation copy and decided to boot it up for review. So without further ado, let's take a look at the intro cutscene and see if we can find ourselves once again entranced in the stylish world of Namco. Setting the mood for the intro cutscene, we get a look at the variety of different playable characters and little subtleties attributed to their personality. The charming nature of the characters met with the energetic drum and bass track in the background make for an intro that is dripping in both style and Y2K aesthetic. To the selection screen we go, accompanied by a groovy backing track to put us in the mood for whatever game mode we choose to play. I decided to try my luck in the Extreme Winners Cup, in hopes of getting that full arcade effect that Namco does so well. The character selection screen is dope, and I really enjoy the design of each character. From the mini animations that play when we go to select a character, to the transition of the lettering, there's a lot of that early 2000s aesthetic to soak in here. I mean, it really looks like something you would be playing at a local arcade back in the day, and y'all already know I'm here for it. But let's go ahead and dive into the game, so we can find out how well these arcade mechanics have transitioned over to the PlayStation 2. Also, our first course is called Nostalgia Remix Part 2. How fitting. Enjoy.
3, 2, 1, go!
Ooh la la. Now, as much of a nostalgia nerd as I am, I have to say this game doesn't have the most solid gameplay I've ever experienced, especially in comparison to other snowboarding games of its time. But despite all shortcomings in its playstyle, I still found myself very much mesmerized and relaxed in its snowy landscapes. From the smooth sounds of the Vaporwave SD&B instrumentals, the laid-back nature of each character, and the easy to pick up mechanics, I found myself having a pretty good time. Each character has their own special moveset and style, with tricks being done at fixed moments on each course, meaning all you have to worry about is gaining speed and avoiding objects in your path. The game is pretty easy, and I can definitely see it holding a lot more immersion with use of the arcade sway bar controls. But if you're just looking to turn your brain off and ride down a selection of stylish slopes, Alpine Racer 3 has got you covered. It's an obscure title that I feel can be appreciated by the right audience, and is definitely worth a shot through emulation at the very least. Also, Melina is hot. Very, very hot.
Thank you, I love you all too.
All in all, it's a game worth playing, as I really enjoyed my time in its stylishly crafted world. But when it comes to peak Namco aesthetic and a beautifully crafted universe, allow me to indulge you all with my favorite and final entry for this video. But you better get ready to fight, because we're gonna have to muscle our way through the King of Iron Fist tournament in Tekken 4. But first, let's get into a little bit of backstory on the origins of the Tekken series, and see what led to a game that many regard as its most stylish entry. Much like many other Namco games in the early 90s, Tekken had gotten its start in the arcades of 1994, before swiftly moving to the original PlayStation in 95. The arcade version featured 8 playable characters, each with their own sub-boss fights, which was later upgraded in the PlayStation version. The game fared incredibly well, and quickly became a force in the competitive arcade scene. But this was only the beginning for Tekken, as its demand grew for both the home console and arcade settings. Namco went on to release 2 more entries for both platforms, and even began a series of competitive tournaments for titles such as Tekken 3. Here's a little bit of throwback footage from the Game Master 1998 Tekken 3 World Finals. Just take a look at how far esports have come since. Hey man, save some for the rest of us. Anywho, as the rapid success of Tekken 3 reigned supreme for fighting games in the late 90s, it was time for Namco to begin preparations on the next generation of consoles. The PlayStation 2 released on March 4, 2000, with Tekken Tag Tournament being one of the titles available at launch. And while Tekken Tag was already available for arcades prior to its console launch, it was very much a breath of fresh air for Western Tekken enthusiasts, and boasted an incredible presentation for its time. But many Tekken fans were patiently waiting for what Namco had to offer in their 4th entry. They knew this Tekken game would have to come correct both visually and gameplay wise, as it was going to be the first mainline release for the next-gen console. And coming at a time when other great fighting games such as Soul Calibur 2 and Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance were being released, It was up to Namco to truly shift this beloved series in a whole new direction and set the tone for what Namco games were all about. And if there is one thing that Namco did right in Tekken 4, it's the atmosphere. From what we can see in the intro cutscene, Tekken 4 has taken a much darker approach in their cinematography and style. Kazuya is back once again in an attempt to reclaim the Mishima Zaibatsu. He enters the King of Iron Fist Tournament 4 along with the varied roster of other playable characters, all in search of glory or something much more personal. Tekken 4 is one of the first games to ever really include a detailed story, and each character has their own narrative to explore as you play. And I gotta say, I really love the robotic yet soothing voice used for the narration of each character's story.
One day, Steve was ordered by a mafia group to throw a high-stakes fight, but he refused and instead won the fight. Unfortunately, the mafia made good on their threats and put a price on Steve's head. With the mafia in hot pursuit, Steve fled England for the United States and led a life on the run.
Even the subtleties of the menu sound effects are just so damn relaxing. Tekken 4 also includes a section for replaying cutscenes and listening to the colorful selection of stage music. And while we're talking about the music, how good is the building theme? I mean, come on.
Round 1. Fight.
The multiple movies are earned through completing the storyline of that respecting character, and these cutscenes are truly dripping with that early 2000s aesthetic goodness. And while these may look a bit clunky in today's standards, these kind of visuals were mind-boggling for their time and still hold a very retro charm to them that I very much enjoy. Now onto the real meat and bones of Tekken, the fighting. While the original arcade version of Tekken 4 included a roster of 23 characters, 17 returning and 6 brand new, the console version upped the ante, with an additional 2 characters being added as palette swaps. There's also 12 playable stages, all with their own unique themes and atmosphere. This is really where the game begins to shine aesthetically, as you'll find yourself captivated in these beautifully crafted dreamscapes. And while die-hard sweats of the Tekken series had an extreme hatred for the balance issues of these levels, visually, it's hard to argue that Tekken has ever done anything more stylish than this. Starting with the mall stage, just give yourself a moment to really soak in all the aesthetics that are present in this level. From the gorgeous water physics of the fountain, the neon lighting that lines the ceiling, to the signature skylights found in most shopping centers. It's all so damn nostalgic, and honestly, it's a place I would love to be. What's really cool about Tekken 4 is they also give you a variety of areas to explore on each stage, meaning you're given multiple different views and angles of each map, which really keeps things fresh as you play through these levels multiple times. The environments are also destructible in certain areas, such as stair railings and the building columns. It's truly the peak of Namco aesthetic for me, but I'd be remiss if I weren't to guide you through another one of my personal favorites, the airport level. The airport is such a soothing selection. It's really one of those stages where I just want to go into practice mode and take in its calming ambiance, all while beating the brakes off of my opponent, of course. It's a desolate, almost liminal stage that provides a beautiful sense of comfort, mostly due to its soothing color palette. The stage is set just before the hours of nighttime, with a beautiful backdrop of city skylines in the distance. A funky, almost elevator-like song plays in the background, which is really a strange choice for a game about throat punches and body slams, but in the case of Tekken 4, it's damn good. Honestly, I feel you, Nina. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the wonderfully cheesy game mode by the name of Tekken Force. Tekken Force was first introduced in Tekken 3 on the PlayStation Original, and while it was appreciated at its time, it didn't hold up so well with age. Now playing through the Tekken 4 version, I've gotta say, it's quite a treat. It's really just your typical beat 'em up style game, only with Tekken movesets, but what I love about it is the cheesy 80s action movie vibe it gives off. From the hordes of guys standing around just waiting for you to punch them in the face, to the cheap sounding electronic instrumentals, It feels like I'm playing through the plot of a bargain bin DVD I found at Big Lots in 2005. And I mean that in the best way possible. This game is really fun, and not to mention, I love when the announcer says, If I had to sum up Tekken 4 in just a couple of words, I would have to say it's insanely charming. It's one of those games that can really turn a stressful day around, and for anyone who's a fan of nostalgic media, this game just scratches that itch. The Tekken series is phenomenal through and through, but Namco has yet to do anything like Tekken 4 in terms of its visual aesthetic. It's a game that can be appreciated by much more than your average fighting game fanatic, and has come to be one of my go-to rainy day titles. It's a testament to the beautiful visual stylings of the early 2000s, and another remarkable feat for Namco's wonderful catalog of games. But I hope you've enjoyed